Today's video is sponsored by Incogni, of whom more later. So you know I like steam trains, right? I mean, that's not a huge revelation, is it? Well, I've made a few videos talking about them, I like making them, and judging by the comments, people seem to enjoy watching them. So here's another one. This one was inspired by a recent visit to Didcot Railway Centre. I've been to the centre more times than I can remember. In fact, this video is probably going to feature shots from more than one visit. It's one of my favourite heritage railways. It's dedicated to the Great Western Railway, and I think it might be one of the most comprehensive collections of artefacts relating to a single railway company in the world. There are locomotives, carriages, wagons, buildings, down to small items in their museum. They even have some really esoteric items like the prototype gas turbine locomotive and a length of track from Isambard Kingdom Brunel's experimental atmospheric railway. It's also really easy to get to, being right next door to Didcot Parkway station. Anyway, let's talk trains. So this engine that I'm going to start with isn't normally based here, but it was the reason for my most recent visit. This is Furness Railway number 20. I wanted footage of an engine from the 1860s, and there aren't a whole lot of those in working order. This engine was built in 1863. Although I have to say, in some ways it's not a great representation of 1860s locomotive design, because it was fairly old-fashioned when it was built. For comparison, here's Metropolitan Railway number 23, built the same year. And here is fellow Furness Railway engine Copperknob, built in 1846. Number 20 looks a lot more like the latter than the former. Number 20's story is quite remarkable. It was built as a goods engine by Sharp Stewart, which was a company, not the nickname of a guy called Stewart who was very on the ball. It was built for goods work, but as I say, was quite old-fashioned and quickly became obsolete. So it was sold to the Barrow Hematite Steel Company and rebuilt as a tank engine. There it kept working, incredibly, until 1960. It was withdrawn and presented to a local school. In 1983 it was bought for preservation. In 1998 its restoration was completed to as near to its original design as was practical. Obviously, being the oldest working standard-gauge steam engine in Britain, it's something of a celebrity, and it's now in the care of the Furness Railway Trust, based at the Ribble Steam Railway. Incidentally, sister locomotive number 25 also survives, and the Trust hopes to restore it in its later tank engine form. Now, before I get on to the engines that are actually based here, I think it's time for a word from our sponsors, Incogni. We're surrounded by warning signs to keep us safe, but some dangers aren't so obvious. This is why I never eat seafood from a van. Another popular danger that people like to run into is data theft. We're always being monitored online, and not just by nice people like the government and the police. Websites love to skim your data and sell it on to brokers who are very shady individuals indeed. Thereafter, you're at the mercy of data breaches, identity theft, and all sorts of vileness. That's why Incogni is great. It's an automated service that contacts all these information-hoarding scoundrels with the legal demand to remove your information from their databases. Meaning that you don't have to go through all that bump yourself. And because Incogni loves you so much, the first 100 people to follow the link below and enter the code HAZARD will get 60% off. Please note, Incogni cannot help you if you ate seafood from a van. Now we're going to move on to an engine that is based here, namely, well, not namely, it doesn't have a name, but this is the sole surviving locomotive of the Cardiff Railway, formerly number 5, later Great Western Railway number 1338, after the Cardiff Railway was taken over in 1922. The Great Western tended to use the 1300 number series for weird little classes of engine like this one. The Cardiff Railway had a grand total of 11 miles of track, and it connected the main line to the various industrial railways of Cardiff. This engine was built by Kitson of Leeds in 1898. It's quite lucky to survive. The GWR didn't much like these odd, non-standard locomotives. But this one was able to find enough jobs to keep it busy until 1963, by which time the railway preservation movement had got going. This next engine, number 1340, is another of those weird little classes, although it's better known by its name, Trojan. It's a year older than 1338 and was built by Avonside for a private owner, Dunn and Shute of Newport. Then, in 1903, it was bought by the Alexandra Docks Railway, which in 1923 was absorbed by the Great Western. Most of the lines absorbed by the GWR in the 1920s were small companies, usually in South Wales, and the GWR seemed to view them almost with contempt. When the other railways were grouped in 1923, they formed new companies with new names. The London and North Eastern, the London, Midland and Scottish, and the Southern. The GWR said, no, we're the big fish around here, we're going to keep our name and all these little companies we take over can just deal with it. As the GWR didn't like non-standard locos, Trojan was sold into industry. And like Furness number 20, that was the key to its survival. It kept going until 1968, whereupon it was purchased for Didcot. It's also gained an odd measure of fame due to being the closest thing that exists in real life to Percy the Small Engine from the Thomas the Tank Engine stories. It's kind of a curious set of circumstances. So when Reverend Awdry first started writing his books, the engines were just approximate types. Like, Gordon was an express engine, Edward was a technologically superseded Victorian loco, Thomas was, well, a tank engine. Later on, the Rev started basing his locos on real classes and generally started making notes about the fictional setting of the island of Sodor that make Tolkien look lazy. But the trouble was that he still had these vaguely defined early characters whose visual basis had mostly been created by illustrators with a non-technical background. So he had to kind of retcon these rather tortuous explanations of what characters like Percy actually were. Percy is supposed to be a kind of Frankenstein's monster built from parts of lots of different engines, but started out as an Avonside saddle tank like Trojan. Hence, Trojan has become known as the original Percy, even though it isn't, really. I don't know, I feel like I've spent far too much time talking about Thomas the Tank Engine in this video, but I might do a video looking at this stuff in more depth, if people would like that. Bonnie Prince Charlie here is a spring chicken by comparison, built by Robert Stevenson and Hawthorne in 1949. It had a working life of 20 years with Corral Limited. It never worked for the Great Western or any of its constituents, and indeed the GWR hadn't existed for over a year when it was built. The Centre's excellent blog, Going Loco, justifies it as representing industrial railways served by the GWR. But I don't know, I don't think it needs justifying. It's just nice. This is perhaps my favourite engine based here. It's barely a Great Western engine, but it is local. This is Wantage Tramway number 5, the oldest engine here, dating from 1857. It was built by George England for the Sandy and Potton Railway, then sold to the London and North Western Railway in 1862. After a period as a shunter at Crewe, it was sold in 1878 to the Wantage Tramway Company, with whom it worked until 1946. The GWR, curiously, bought it for display at Wantage Road. They weren't a company usually much given to historical sentiment. In 1965 the station closed, but in 1969 the engine was acquired by the Society at Didcot. Under the LNWR and the GWR it was named Shannon, and at Wantage it was known by the nickname of Jane. Sadly, due to the condition of the firebox, it's unlikely to steam again, but unlikely events have been the saving of so many locomotives here, so who knows? Well, I do hope you enjoyed today's video. If so, you may wish to click on that like button down there and press subscribe for more, if you haven't already. I have plenty of footage, so I might talk about some of the other engines at Didcot in future, if that's something you'd like to see. I'd particularly like to talk about these diesels here. A big thank you, as always, to my donors on Ko-fi and Patreon, and here on YouTube. You are the Cardiff Railway to my colliery. I'd also like to thank Incogni for sponsoring today's video. Click on the link in the description below to take advantage of their kind offer. And I will see you all again very soon. Cheerio.